The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Blackwood mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. In the east wing, behind a heavy oak door, the steady beep of medical equipment marked the passage of time. Eleanor Blackwood lay motionless in the center of the room, her silver hair spread across white pillows like a halo. The machines breathed for her. The monitors tracked her heartbeat, but her eyes remained closed, locked behind a darkness that had lasted 6 months. Evelyn Clark moved through the room with practiced silence. Her footsteps made no sound on the thick carpet. Her hands were steady as she checked the oxygen levels, adjusted the IV drip, and smoothed the blankets around Eleanor's fragile frame. She had done this every morning for 8 years, long before the accident that left the matriarch of the Blackwood family trapped in this suspended state between life and death. But Evelyn still remembered the woman Eleanor had been, sharp, elegant, fierce in her love for her son Marcus, and fierce in her judgments of those who came into his life. Evelyn remembered the way Eleanor would sit in the garden reading her mystery novels with a cup of Earl Grey balanced on her knee, the way she laughed at her own jokes, the way she looked at Evelyn with something close to affection and said, "Your family, dear, don't ever forget that." Now Eleanor was silent. Evelyn leaned close and whispered as she did every morning, "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood. It's Tuesday. The roses are blooming early this year. You'd love to see them." There were no response. There never was, but Evelyn kept talking anyway because somewhere in the medical journals she'd read late at night she learned that coma patients could sometimes hear. That familiar voices might reach through the darkness. That hope, however small, was worth holding on to. She picked up a worn copy of Agatha Christie from the bedside table, Eleanor's favorite. Evelyn opened to the bookmarked page and began to read aloud, her voice soft and rhythmic, filling the quiet room with words about detectives and mysteries and secrets that always eventually came to light. Evelyn didn't notice the figure standing in the doorway. Vivian Ashford watched from the shadows, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the doorframe. Her blonde hair fell in salon-perfect waves over her shoulders. Her blue-green eyes were cold, calculating. She had been standing there for 3 minutes, observing the way Evelyn touched Eleanor's hand, the way she read with such tenderness, the way she seemed to fill the room with a warmth that Vivian could never manufacture, and she hated her for it. Vivian stepped into the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The sound shattered the peaceful atmosphere like glass breaking. Still reading to her, Vivian's voice was smooth, pleasant even, but there was an edge beneath it, sharp as a blade. "I wonder if it makes any difference. The doctors say she can't hear anything." Evelyn looked up, her expression neutral, professional. She had learned over the past 2 months since Vivian moved into the mansion that any reaction would be used against her later. "Some studies suggest auditory stimulation can help," Evelyn said quietly. She closed the book and stood smoothing her simple navy scrubs. "It's part of the care protocol." "Of course." Vivian walked closer, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of someone looking for flaws. "Although I did notice you were 15 minutes late checking her vitals this morning. Marcus wouldn't be pleased to hear that his mother's care is becoming inconsistent." Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. She had checked the vitals at exactly 6 o'clock, the same time she had every morning for 8 years. But she didn't argue. Arguments with Vivian never ended well. "I'll make a note to be more precise," Evelyn said evenly. Vivian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's all I ask. We all want what's best for Eleanor, don't we?" She left the room as suddenly as she'd entered, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and something else. Something that made Evelyn's skin crawl. Evelyn waited until the footsteps faded down the hallway. Then she looked down at Eleanor, at the woman who had once been so strong and vital, now reduced to a collection of tubes and monitors and machines that breathed for her. "She's lying, Mrs. Blackwood," Evelyn whispered. "I don't know why yet, but she's lying." The Blackwood mansion sat on 3 acres in the hills above Beverly Hills, a sprawling estate of white stone and tall windows that gleamed in the California sun. Inside the house was a maze of rooms filled with expensive furniture, original paintings, and the kind of silence that came with old money and older secrets. Marcus Blackwood moved through this world like a man underwater. He ran Blackwood Technologies from a home office on the second floor, managing billion-dollar contracts and international deals, while his mother lay dying one floor below. He told himself he was doing what needed to be done, that the business couldn't stop just because his personal life had fallen apart, that Eleanor would understand. But late at night, when the house was dark and quiet, he wondered if he was simply running away. He had met Vivian 2 years ago at a charity gala in Los Angeles. She was elegant, charming, articulate. She spoke 4 languages and had practiced law for a prestigious firm in New York before retiring to focus on philanthropy. She seemed perfect. She seemed safe. His mother had disagreed. Marcus could still remember that conversation 1 week before the accident that changed everything. Eleanor had gripped his hand across the dining table and said, "There's something wrong with that woman, Marcus. I can feel it. Promise me you'll be careful." He hadn't listened. He told himself his mother was being overprotective, that Vivian was exactly what she appeared to be: successful, beautiful, in love with him. 1 week later, Eleanor's car had gone off the road on Pacific Coast Highway. Single vehicle accident, no witnesses. The police found brake fluid leaking from the undercarriage, but the investigation concluded it was mechanical failure, nothing more. Eleanor survived, but barely. She'd been in a coma ever since, trapped in a hospital bed, that Marcus had moved into the mansion so she could be surrounded by familiar things, so he could be close to her, so he could tell himself he was doing enough. Vivian had moved in 3 months after the accident. Marcus proposed 2 months after that. The wedding was scheduled for 2 weeks from today, and his mother remained silent, unable to voice whatever warning she had tried to give him that night. Marcus stood at his office window, now looking down at the garden where Evelyn was walking between the rose bushes, carrying a basket of fresh linens. She moved with a grace that seemed out of place in the chaos of his life. Steady, reliable, present in a way he hadn't been. Evelyn had been with the family since she was 22 years old. Fresh out of nursing school, looking for work, willing to take a live-in position caring for his father during his final battle with cancer. She'd stayed after his father died, transitioning to general household management and becoming in the process something more than an employee. His mother loved her, trusted her, had made Evelyn the executor of her medical directives, a detail that Vivian brought up often always with a tight smile. "Don't you think it's strange," Vivian had said just last week, "that your mother gave so much power to the help? What if something goes wrong? What if decisions need to be made?" Marcus had defended Evelyn then, but lately, Vivian's words had started to echo in his mind during the long sleepless hours before dawn. What if the first real crack in the facade came on a Thursday night? Evelyn was in the small staff room adjacent to Eleanor's suite, reviewing medication schedules and preparing the evening dose of antibiotics when the alarm began to sound. The harsh mechanical beeping cut through the quiet house like a scream. She dropped everything and ran. Eleanor's room was 30 feet away, but it felt like miles. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs as she burst through the door, her eyes immediately scanning the monitors. The oxygen saturation was dropping. The ventilator tube had come partially dislodged and Eleanor's chest was barely moving. Evelyn's training took over. She moved with swift precision, repositioning Eleanor's head, checking the tube, ensuring the seal was tight. Her hands were steady even as her mind raced. This shouldn't have happened. She had checked everything less than 30 minutes ago. Everything had been secure. The oxygen levels began to rise. Eleanor's chest moved with the steady rhythm of the ventilator again. The alarm fell silent. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her hands still trembling with adrenaline. She made notes on the incident report, checked and double-checked every connection, every tube, every monitor. She didn't hear Vivian enter the room. What happened? Evelyn turned. Vivian stood in the doorway, her silk robe wrapped tight around her body, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. The ventilator tube was loose. Evelyn said, keeping her voice calm and professional. "I've secured it. Mrs. Blackwood is stable now." Vivian moved closer, her gaze sharp. "How does that happen, Evelyn? You're supposed to be monitoring her constantly. I checked everything 30 minutes ago. It was all secure. And yet here we are." Vivian crossed her arms. "I saw you leave the room earlier. You were gone for quite some time. 20 minutes at least. I was in the medication room preparing the evening dose. I'm always within earshot of the alarm." Still, Vivian's voice dropped lower, more intimate, like she was sharing a secret. "This is exactly what I've been worried about. You're overworked, Evelyn. You're here alone with her for such long stretches. Mistakes happen when we're tired, when we're not paying attention." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I didn't make a mistake." "Of course not. I'm sure you did your best." Vivian smiled, soft and sympathetic. "But Marcus needs to know about this for his mother's safety. You understand?" Before Evelyn could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. He must have heard the alarm from his office upstairs. His dark hair was disheveled, his shirt untucked, and there was a wild, frightened look in his eyes that Evelyn had seen too many times in the past 6 months. "What happened? Is she okay?" Vivian turned to him, her expression shifting seamlessly from cool assessment to warm concern. The ventilator tube came loose. Evelyn caught it, thank God, but "Marcus, we need to talk about this. It's the third incident this month." Evelyn's breath caught. "The third? There haven't been any other incidents." Vivian gave her a pitying look. "The medication mix-up last week, the missed vital signs check on Monday, and now this." "Evelyn, know you care about Eleanor, but perhaps it's time to consider that one person can't handle this level of care alone." "There was no medication mix-up," Evelyn said, her voice hardening despite her best efforts to stay calm. "And I have never missed a vital signs check, ever." Marcus looked between the two women, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Vivian, what are you talking about? I haven't heard about any of this." "Because I didn't want to worry you," Vivian said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "I know how much stress you're under with the merger. I've been trying to handle things here to keep an eye on things, but..." She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Evelyn felt the trap closing around her. Every word she said now would sound like an excuse. Every defense would seem like deflection. She looked at Marcus, willing him to see the truth, to remember 8 years of dedicated service, of care, that went beyond duty into something deeper. But Marcus had looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and in that moment, Evelyn realized that Vivian had been very, very careful in planting these seeds of doubt. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "we should install security cameras, just in the main care areas, for everyone's peace of mind." Evelyn's heart sank, but she nodded. "Of course, whatever you think is best." Vivian's smile was triumphant, just for a moment before she smoothed it into something softer. "That's very wise, darling. I'll help you arrange it tomorrow." After they left, Evelyn stood alone in Eleanor's room listening to the steady beep of the monitors. She walked to the bed and looked down at the woman who had become like family to her. "I know something's wrong, Mrs. Blackwood," she whispered. "I know she's doing this, but I can't prove it yet." And then so faintly that Evelyn almost thought she imagined it, Eleanor's fingers twitched, just once, just barely. But enough to make Evelyn believe that somewhere deep in the darkness, Eleanor was still fighting too. The cameras were installed within 48 hours. Small discrete devices tucked into corners of Eleanor's room, the hallways, the medication preparation area. The technician explained that Marcus would have access to all the footage through a secure app on his phone and computer. "For your mother's protection," Marcus had said, though he couldn't quite meet Evelyn's eyes when he said it. Evelyn didn't argue. She knew the cameras would show the truth, that she was meticulous in her care, that she never cut corners, never missed the check, never made the mistakes Vivian claimed she had made. But on the third night after the cameras were installed, Evelyn lay awake in her small room adjacent to Eleanor's suite, and a terrible thought crept into her mind. What if Vivian knew the cameras would prove Evelyn's innocence? What if that wasn't the point at all? What if Vivian was planning something else entirely? and wanted the cameras there to record whatever came next. Evelyn got out of bed and walked quietly to Eleanor's room. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the medical equipment. She stood in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of Eleanor's chest, and she made a decision. She would document everything, every medication dose, every vital sign check, every conversation. She would keep her own records separate from the official charts just in case. Because something was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the way Vivian Nain looked at Eleanor with barely concealed impatience, in the way Marcos seemed to be drifting further away from reality. Something was coming, and Evelyn needed to be ready. 5 days after the cameras were installed, Marcos sat in his office late at night, reviewing footage on his laptop. He had been doing this every evening, watching hours of recordings, searching for the incidents Vivian had described. The medication mix-ups, the careless mistakes, the evidence that would justify his growing unease. But he found nothing. The footage showed Evelyn moving through her routines with practiced efficiency. She checked Eleanor's vitals every 2 hours exactly as scheduled. She prepared medications with meticulous care, double-checking every label, every dose. She cleaned, she monitored, she spoke softly to his mother even when there was no one around to hear. She was perfect. And that's when Marcos noticed something else. He scrolled back through the footage from the night of the alarm, the night the ventilator tube came loose. He watched Evelyn leave the room at 8:47 p.m. to prepare medications. The timestamp on the camera was clear. At 9:01 p.m., another figure entered Eleanor's room. Vivian. She moved to the bedside, looked down at Eleanor for a long moment, then reached toward the ventilator. The angle of the camera didn't show exactly what she did. Her body blocked the view, but she was there for 45 seconds. Then, she left. At 9:06 p.m., the alarm began to sound. At 9:07 p.m., Evelyn ran into the room. Marcos stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. He rewound the footage, watched it again and again. Vivian had been in the room right before the alarm, right before the tube came loose. He minimized the window and sat back in his chair, his hands shaking. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she was checking on his mother. Maybe she adjusted the blankets and accidentally bumped the tube. Maybe it was innocent, but Vivian had blamed Evelyn, had called it the third incident, had suggested Evelyn was incompetent, overwhelmed, dangerous even. Marcus opened a new window and began scrolling through older footage, searching for the other incidents Vivian had mentioned. The medication mix-up, the missed vital signs check. He searched for 2 hours. He found nothing, because they had never happened. But he did find other things. He found footage of Vivian entering the medication room when Evelyn wasn't there, opening cabinets, moving bottles. He found her standing over Eleanor's bed in the middle of the night, her expression cold and calculating. He found her on multiple occasions, creating situations that would make Evelyn look careless or distracted. And he found something else, something that made his blood run cold. On the footage from 2 nights ago, at 2:00 a.m., Vivian had entered Eleanor's room. She stood beside the bed for a long time, just watching. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. The camera had no audio, but Marcus could read her lips well enough to catch fragments of what she was saying. 2 weeks. Can't wait any longer. The will needs to be changed before... She had paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. Of course, I'm sure the old woman isn't waking up, and after the wedding, I'll be legally family. No one can contest it then. Marcus closed the laptop. His hands were shaking so badly, he could barely control them. He wanted to be wrong, wanted there to be some other explanation, but the evidence was there, captured in cold digital clarity. Vivian wasn't trying to protect his mother. She was trying to harm her. And she was using Evelyn as a scapegoat for her own actions. But why? What did Vivian gain from this? The answer came to him slowly, sickeningly. The will. Eleanor's will left everything to Marcus, of course, but there were provisions, trusts, conditions, Protections in place that would make it difficult for any spouse of Marcus's to access Eleanor's personal fortune until certain conditions were met. Unless Eleanor died before the wedding, then the will would transfer everything to Marcus with no conditions, no trusts, no barriers. And as his wife Vivian would have access to it all. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He needed to confront her, needed to call the police, needed to know. He stopped himself. If he confronted Vivian now, she would deny everything. She would destroy evidence, create alibis, turn the situation around. She was smart, calculating. She had already proven how easily she could manipulate him. He needed more than suspicion. He needed undeniable proof. He needed to catch her in the act. And suddenly Marcus knew exactly what he had to do. The next morning, Marcus made an announcement over breakfast. He had been called to New York for an emergency board meeting. A merger complication that required his personal attention. He would be gone for 5 days, possibly a week. Vivian's eyes lit up, though she tried to hide it behind a mask of concern. A week, that's such a long time. Are you sure you need to go? I don't have a choice, Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. The investors are threatening to pull out. I have to handle this personally. Of course. I understand. Vivian reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Don't worry about things here. I'll take care of everything. That's what I'm afraid of, Marcus thought. But he smiled and nodded and played his part. Evelyn was in the kitchen preparing Eleanor's breakfast supplement when Marcus found her. She looked up surprised. He rarely came to the staff areas of the house. I need to speak with you, he said quietly, privately. They walked to the garden far enough from the house that they couldn't be overheard. The morning sun was bright and warm, and the roses were blooming just as Evelyn had told his mother they would be. I'm leaving for New York tonight, Marcus said, but I need you to do something for me while I'm gone. Evelyn looked at him with those steady gray eyes that had seen so much over the past 8 years. What do you need? I need you to watch her, not my mother, Vivian. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Understanding, validation, relief. You know, she said quietly, it wasn't a question. I've seen the footage. I know what she's doing, but I need proof. Undeniable, incontrovertible proof. Marcus pulled out a small device from his pocket. This is a recording device. I need you to keep it on you at all times. If Vivian does anything, says anything, I need it recorded. Evelyn took the device, turning it over in her hands. You could have just confronted her, called the police. With what evidence, suspicions, circumstantial footage, she'd lawyer up and walk away. Marcus's jaw tightened. No, I need her to show her hand completely, and she'll only do that if she thinks I'm not watching. This is dangerous, Evelyn said. If she realizes what we're doing, I know. That's why I need you to be careful. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately. He handed her a second phone, a burner. This is only for emergencies. Don't use your regular phone. I think she might be monitoring my calls. Evelyn pocketed both devices. Mr. Blackwood, Marcus, why is she doing this? What does she want? Marcus looked back at the house, at the window of his mother's room where Eleanor lay trapped in darkness. Money, power, the Blackwood name. He turned back to Evelyn, and she's willing to kill for it. The words hung in the air between them, terrible and true. I won't let her hurt Mrs. Blackwood, Evelyn said quietly. I promise you that. I know. Marcus managed a small, sad smile. My mother was right about you. She said you were family. I should have listened to her about a lot of things. He left that evening, making a show of packing bags and arranging car service to the airport. Vivian kissed him goodbye at the door, her performance of the devoted fiancée flawless. But once his car disappeared down the long driveway, her expression changed. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by something cold and predatory. She turned to find Evelyn standing in the hallway watching her. Just the two of us now, Vivian said softly. For a whole week. I suppose we'll finally see what you're really made of, won't we, Evelyn? Evelyn didn't respond. She simply turned and walked back to Eleanor's room, feeling the weight of the recording device in her pocket and the weight of her promise to Marcus. The game had begun. and Evelyn had no intention of losing. But Marcus hadn't gone to New York at all. 20 miles outside Los Angeles, he pulled into a parking garage and parked on the third level. From his trunk, he removed a large duffel bag. Inside were hospital scrubs, a realistic fake ID badge, a surgical mask, and a cap. He had spent the past 3 days acquiring everything he needed from a medical supply company that asked very few questions when you paid in cash. In the bathroom of a nearby gas station, Marcus Blackwood transformed into David Miller, visiting nurse from a regional healthcare agency. The badge looked authentic. The uniform fit perfectly. The mask covered most of his face. He looked at himself in the mirror. His own mother wouldn't recognize him like this. That was the point. He drove back toward Beverly Hills, toward the mansion he had left just an hour before, toward the woman he had trusted and the woman who had earned his trust, and toward whatever dark truth was waiting to be uncovered. The cameras in Eleanor's room were still recording, but this time Marcus would be in the picture too, watching, waiting, ready to step in the moment Vivian made her move. He parked 3 blocks away and walked to the service entrance of the mansion, the entrance the medical staff used when they arrived for their shifts. The security guard at the gate checked his ID, called the main house for confirmation of the new nurse's arrival, and waved him through. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest as he approached the door. This was insane, reckless. If he was caught, the consequences would be devastating. But if he wasn't there, if he let Vivian continue unchecked, his mother would die. He was certain of it now. The door opened. Evelyn stood there, her expression neutral and professional, as she greeted the new nurse the agency had sent. But when her eyes met his, just for a fraction of a second, he saw recognition flicker across her face. She saw through the disguise. She knew. She didn't say anything. She simply stepped aside and let him in. "Welcome to the Blackwood residence," Evelyn said, her voice steady and calm. "Let me show you where everything is." As she led him through the familiar halls of his own home, Marcus felt the final piece of the plan fall into place. Evelyn knew who he really was. She would help him. Together, they would protect his mother, and together they would unmask the woman who had slithered into their lives with murder in her heart and money in her eyes. The silent witness was silent no more. The truth was coming. And Vivian Ashford had no idea what was waiting for her in the shadows. The first thing Marcus noticed standing in the hallway of his own home disguised as a stranger was how different everything looked from this angle. As the master of the house, he had moved through these spaces with ownership, with familiarity. Now, as a David Miller, he saw the mansion through the eyes of the staff. The people who existed in the margins of his life, invisible until needed. Evelyn walked ahead of him, her posture straight and professional, explaining the layout of the medical wing. Her voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. She knew who he was, and she was terrified. Not of him, for him. "Mrs. Blackwood's room is the largest suite on the ground floor," Evelyn said, leading him down a corridor lined with family portraits. Marcus's own face stared down at him from the walls, and he kept his head lowered, the surgical cap and mask hiding most of his features. "She requires monitoring every 2 hours. The schedule is posted by the door." They entered Eleanor's room, and Marcus felt his breath catch despite himself. He had been here just this morning before leaving, had kissed his mother's forehead and whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep. But seeing her now through the pretense of being someone else made the reality of her condition hit him with fresh brutality. She looked so small, so fragile, like a bird with broken wings. Evelyn moved to the bedside and began her routine checks with practiced efficiency. She spoke softly as she worked, narrating what she was doing for the benefit of the new nurse. Oxygen saturation is at 97%, heart rate steady at 62 beats per minute, blood pressure within normal range. Her hands were gentle as she adjusted Eleanor's blanket, smoothed her hair. "Mrs. Blackwood responds well to familiar voices. I read to her every evening. Agatha Christie mostly. They're her favorites." Marcus watched Evelyn work and felt something shift inside him. Guilt perhaps, or recognition. This woman had been caring for his mother with a devotion that went far beyond duty, and he had allowed Vivian to poison his mind against her. He had doubted Evelyn when he should have trusted the evidence of 8 years of loyalty. The medication schedule is complex. Evelyn continued, opening a binder filled with detailed charts. Everything is documented here. Every dose, every time, every observation. I keep duplicate records in case anything happens to the primary files. Smart, Marcus thought. She had been preparing for this confrontation with Vivian long before he had realized there was a war being waged in his own home. Evelyn looked up at him, then her grey eyes meeting his for just a moment. In that brief connection, entire conversations happened without words. I know who you are. I'll keep your secret. We're in this together now. Be careful. Marcus nodded barely. Enough to acknowledge. Enough to agree. The moment shattered when heels clicked in the hallway outside. Vivian entered the room like a storm front, all cold pressure and crackling energy. She wore white linen pants and a silk blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a flawless chignon. She looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine, not a sick room. Her eyes landed on Marcus, and something flickered across her face. Suspicion, annoyance. It was gone too quickly to identify. The new nurse, Vivian, said, her voice pleasant but edged with frost. How unexpected. I wasn't informed we were changing staff. The agency sent confirmation this morning, Evelyn said smoothly. With Mr. Blackwood away, they thought it best to increase coverage. David will be handling the overnight shifts. David. Vivian's gaze traveled over him slowly, analytically. Marcus kept his breathing steady, his posture relaxed. He was just a tired healthcare worker on another shift. Nothing to see, nothing to worry about. But Vivian stepped closer, invading his space. You look familiar. Have we met before? Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. He let his voice drop lower, rougher than his natural tone. Don't think so, ma'am. I'm new to the agency, just moved from Portland last month. Portland. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. What brought you to Los Angeles? Work. Better opportunities. Marcus gestured vaguely toward Eleanor. I specialize in long-term care patients, coma cases specifically. It was a detail he had prepared a backstory, built on research, but is saying it out loud here in this room with his mother lying unconscious between them felt like a betrayal. Vivian seemed to accept it, though her expression remained guarded. I see. Well, David, I hope you understand that Mrs. Blackwood's care is of the utmost importance to this family. Any irregularities, any concerns, you report them to me directly. Is that clear? Crystal clear, ma'am. Good. Vivian turned to Evelyn, her demeanor shifting to something sharper. I noticed the medication inventory was low on the morphine. Did you reorder? Yes, this morning. It should arrive tomorrow. And the reports I asked for, the detailed breakdown of Mrs. Blackwood's vital signs for the past week. Evelyn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'll have them ready by end of day. See that you do. Vivian smiled, but it was all teeth and no warmth. We wouldn't want any oversights. She left the room, trailing expensive perfume and barely concealed hostility. Evelyn waited a full minute after the footsteps faded before she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She's escalating. Now that you're gone, or she thinks you're gone, she's going to make her move soon. I know, Marcus said quietly. He moved to the window, looking out at the garden where he and his mother used to walk on Sunday mornings. That's why I'm here. This is dangerous. If she realizes who you are, she won't. Not if we're careful. Marcus turned back to face Evelyn. How much time do we have? Evelyn pulled out her phone and checked the calendar. The wedding is in 6 days, but... She hesitated. But what do we... I overheard her on the phone yesterday. She was talking to someone about moving up the timeline. She said 6 days was too long, that things needed to happen sooner. Marcus felt cold dread settle in his stomach. How much sooner? I don't know. But the way she's been acting today, the way she's watching everything. Evelyn looked at Eleanor, then back at Marcus. I don't think we have 6 days. I think we have maybe 3. Maybe less. The rest of that first day passed in careful observation and mounting tension. Marcus moved through the mansion like a ghost present, but unnoticed, watching the dynamics of his household from the outside looking in. He saw the way the other staff members interacted with Evelyn. Respectful, trusting. They asked her questions, deferred to her judgment. She was the anchor of this place, the one who kept everything running smoothly while he had been lost in work and grief. He saw the way they avoided Vivian, how conversations stopped when she entered a room, how smiles became forced and bodies tensed. The staff feared her, he realized. Not openly, not obviously, but in the small ways that servants learn to fear those with power over their livelihoods. And he saw Vivian herself, stripped of the performance she maintained in his presence. She was restless, prowling through the house like a caged predator. She made phone calls in hushed tones, always moving to private spaces where she thought she couldn't be overheard. She spent long periods in Eleanor's room when she thought no one was watching, standing at the foot of the bed with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Calculation, impatience, something darker. That evening during the shift change, when the day nurses left and the night staff took over, Marcus found himself alone in the medication room cataloging supplies as David Miller was supposed to do. The room was small, efficiently organized, with locked cabinets for controlled substances and detailed inventory logs. He was checking the morphine supply, noting that it was indeed lower than expected when he heard voices outside the door. Vivian's voice, and someone else's male speaking in low, urgent tones. Marcus moved closer to the door, which was slightly ajar. "Can't keep delaying," the male voice said. "The arrangement was clear. 2 weeks, you said. It's been 6 months. "I know the timeline," Vivian snapped. "But the situation is more complicated than I anticipated. The old woman was supposed to die in the accident. The fact that she survived isn't my problem. You owe money, a lot of money, and my employer is getting impatient." Marcus's blood ran cold. He pulled out his phone and started recording. The device Evelyn carried wasn't the only one capturing evidence now. "I'll have it," Vivian said. "After the wedding, I'll have access to the accounts, the full estate. 50 million just like we agreed. 50 million was the price 6 months ago. Now with interest and delays, it's 75. That's absurd. That's business. You want the problem to go away, you pay the price. Otherwise," the man's voice dropped lower, menacing. "Otherwise, certain people might learn about your previous marriages, about the life insurance payouts, about Portland." Silence. Then, Vivian, her voice like ice. "Are you threatening me? I'm reminding you of reality. You have 1 week. After that, I can't protect you anymore. And the Blackwood family might receive some very interesting information about their future daughter-in-law." Footsteps. The man was leaving. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, heart pounding as a figure passed the medication room. Tall, wearing a dark suit, face partially obscured by the angle. The man disappeared down the hallway, and moments later Marcus heard the front door open and close. He waited, counting slowly to 30 before emerging from the medication room. Vivian was gone, but the conversation replayed in his mind, each word more damning than the last. 50 million, previous marriages, life insurance, Portland. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so ugly, Marcus almost couldn't bear to look at it, but he had to. Because his mother's life depended on understanding exactly who Vivian Ashford really was. He found Evelyn in Eleanor's room reading softly from Murder on the Orient Express. She looked up when he entered, marked her place in the book, and waited. Marcus crossed to her and held out his phone, the recording playing on low volume. They stood close together, shoulders almost touching, as Vivian's voice emerged from the speaker, confessing to debts, to previous marriages, to secrets in Portland. When it finished, Evelyn's face had gone pale. "She killed them," Evelyn whispered. "Her previous husbands. That's what he meant about life insurance payouts." "I think so," Marcus said. His hands were shaking. "I think she's done this before. Multiple times. She marries wealthy men, kills them, collects the money. And now she's trying to do it to my family." "But she can't kill you. You're too visible. Too much scrutiny." "No, but my mother." Marcus looked at Eleanor sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger circling her like sharks. If my mother dies before the wedding, her estate transfers to me free and clear. No trusts, no conditions. And once Vivian and I are married, she'll have access to everything. Then we call the police, Evelyn said firmly. We show them this recording, and say what? That we have a recording of a conversation about debt. Her lawyer would tear it apart in seconds. We need more. We need proof of her previous crimes. We need her to incriminate herself completely. Or we need to catch her trying to hurt Mrs. Blackwood, Evelyn said quietly. In the act, undeniably. Marcus looked at her, this woman who had cared for his mother with such devotion, who was now willing to put herself at risk to protect Eleanor. That means waiting, letting her make a move, using my mother as bait. But your mother is already bait, Evelyn said. We're just making sure the trap is set properly. Over the next 2 days, Marcus maintained his disguise as David Miller while systematically gathering evidence. He contacted Thomas Reed, his head of security and former police detective, filling him in on everything he'd discovered. Reed had always been suspicious of Vivian, and now he threw himself into a deep background investigation. What Reed uncovered was chilling. Vivian Ashford was an alias. Her real name was Jennifer Walsh. Before that, Catherine Price. Before that, Amanda Bradley. At least 4 identities over the past 12 years. 3 previous marriages. 3 dead husbands. All wealthy. All within 2 years of the wedding. First husband fell down the stairs in their Portland home, ruled accidental. Second husband, boating accident in Lake Tahoe. Body never fully recovered. Third husband, heart attack at age 45 with no prior cardiac issues. Cremated quickly before anyone could request an autopsy. In each case, Vivian had inherited millions. In each case, she disappeared within 6 months, resurfacing later with a new name and a new target. She's a serial killer, Reed told Marcus over the encrypted phone line. A very smart, very careful serial killer. And your mother figured it out. That's why Vivian had to silence her. The car accident, Marcus said, his voice hollow. She sabotaged my mother's brakes. I've been back through the police report. The mechanic who inspected the car noted that the brake line was cut cleanly, not frayed from wear. At the time, they assumed it was damaged in the crash. But if we look at it now, knowing what we know, she tried to murder my mother 6 months ago. And when that didn't work, she's been waiting for another chance. Marcus, you need to get your mother out of that house, now. Before. No. Marcus's voice was firm. If we move her, Vivian will run. She'll disappear like she did before, change her identity again and find another victim. I want her caught. I want her in prison where she can never hurt anyone else. Then we need to catch her in the act. I have contacted Detective Sarah Morrison at LAPD. She specializes in this kind of case, serial fraud, murder for profit. She's willing to work with us, but she needs evidence that will hold up in court. How much time do we have? Reed was quiet for a moment. Morrison says women like Vivian operate on tight timelines. If she's in debt and facing pressure from loan sharks, she'll act soon. Within days, not weeks. Maybe even tonight. Marcus looked at Eleanor sleeping peacefully in her bed, unaware that her life hung by a thread. Then, we'd better be ready. That evening, Marcus and Evelyn finalized their plan. Reed would monitor the security cameras remotely from his home office, with Detective Morrison on standby. They would catch Vivian in the act attempting to harm Eleanor, and have irrefutable video evidence. But there was one element they needed to make the trap work: bait. The insulin. Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She'll use insulin. It's the perfect murder weapon for someone in your mother's condition. A massive dose would cause fatal hypoglycemia, and it would be almost impossible to distinguish from natural complications of the coma. How would she get it? From the medication room. We keep emergency supplies of insulin, even though your mother isn't diabetic. Standard protocol for any medical facility. Evelyn paused. I checked the inventory this morning. We're missing 1 vial. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. She already took it. Yesterday. While you were upstairs, I saw her go into the medication room, but by the time I got there, she was leaving. I checked later and noticed the missing vial.
Then she's planning to do it soon.
Tonight, probably. We should count it as certain, Evelyn said. Tomorrow is 3 days before the wedding. After tonight, there will be more people around, wedding planners, caterers, family arriving. Tonight is her last chance to do this quietly. They spent the next hour preparing. Reed confirmed that all cameras were recording and that Detective Morrison was standing by with 2 patrol officers parked discreetly down the street. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait. The house grew quiet as the hours passed. Midnight came and went. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Marcus remained in the storage room adjacent to Eleanor's suite, the same hiding place he'd used before. From there, he could see through a crack in the door, could hear everything, could respond within seconds if needed. Evelyn sat in the chair beside Eleanor's bed, reading softly from The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. To any observer, she appeared to be following her normal routine, but the recording device in her pocket was active, and she was hyper-aware of every sound in the house. At 2:43 a.m., they heard it, the soft click of heels on marble, footsteps approaching down the hallway. Evelyn quickly closed her book and settled back in the chair, arranging herself to look like she had fallen asleep while reading. Her breathing slowed, deepened, her head tilted to one side, but her hand hidden beneath the blanket on her lap gripped her phone. One button press would alert Marcus and send an emergency signal to Reed and Detective Morrison. The door opened slowly, almost silently. Vivian entered the room, moving like a shadow. She wore all black leggings, a long-sleeved shirt, even gloves. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely. In her right hand, she carried a small black leather case. She paused just inside the door, her gaze sweeping the room. Her eyes lingered on Evelyn for a long moment, studying the rise and fall of her chest, the relaxed posture of someone deeply asleep. Satisfied, Vivienne moved toward the bed. Marcus watched through the crack in the door, his every muscle tensed. Not yet. Wait for her to act. Wait for evidence that can't be disputed. Vivienne stood beside Eleanor's bed, looking down at the woman who had tried to warn her son, who had seen through her facade from the very beginning. "You should have kept your mouth shut," Vivienne whispered. "You should have accepted me, welcomed me into your family. But no, you had to interfere. You had to poison Marcus against me." She unzipped the black case. Inside, Marcus could see a syringe already filled with clear liquid. Insulin, enough to kill. "This should have been over 6 months ago." Vivian continued, her voice cold and clinical. "The car accident should have worked, but you're stubborn. You survived, and now I have to do this the hard way." Then she reached for Eleanor's IV line, preparing to inject the insulin directly into the tube where it would flood Eleanor's system within seconds. "But after tonight, you'll finally be gone. Marcus will be devastated, of course. He'll need comfort, support, and I'll be there for him. The devoted fiancée, the grieving daughter-in-law who tried so hard to help but just couldn't save you." Vivian's hand moved toward the IV port. "And then once we're married, once I have legal access to everything." She smiled a terrible cold smile. "Well, accidents happen, especially to men who work too hard, who ignore their health, who drink a little too much wine with dinner." She was about to insert the needle when Evelyn moved. "Step away from her."
Vivian spun around, her eyes wide with shock. Evelyn was on her feet, no longer pretending to sleep, her phone raised and recording. "I said step away from Mrs. Blackwood, now." For a moment, Vivian just stared.
Then her expression shifted, cycling through surprise calculation and finally settling on cold fury. "How long have you been awake?" "Long enough," Evelyn said. "Long enough to record your confession. Long enough to watch you try to murder Mrs. Blackwood. Long enough to make sure you never hurt anyone again." Vivian's jaw clenched. "You recorded nothing. And then even if you did, it won't matter. You're the help. A disgruntled employee trying to frame me. Who do you think they'll believe?" "They'll believe the evidence," Marcus said, stepping out of the storage room. "They'll believe the multiple cameras that recorded everything you just did and said. They'll believe the investigation into your previous identities and your dead husbands. Vivian's face went white as Marcus pulled off his surgical mask and cap. Marcus, her voice was barely a whisper. But you're in New York. No, Vivian. I've been here the whole time, watching you, recording everything, waiting for you to show us exactly who you really are. This is entrapment. Vivian's voice rose, panic bleeding through her control. You set me up. We gave you every opportunity to leave my mother alone. Marcus said coldly. Every opportunity to call off your plan. You chose to come here tonight. You chose to try to kill her. Those are your choices. And now you live with the consequences. Vivian's eyes darted between Marcus and Evelyn, between the door and the windows. Marcus could see her mind working, calculating whether she could run, whether she could fight, whether there was any way out. She lunged for the syringe that had fallen on the bed. But Evelyn was faster. She grabbed Vivian's wrist, twisting it away from the needle. The two women struggled and Marcus moved to help. But before he could reach them, the door burst open. Detective Morrison entered with two uniformed officers, their weapons drawn. LAPD, nobody move. Vivian froze. The fight went out of her body all at once and she sagged against the bed rail, defeated. Miss Ashford, or whatever your real name is, you're under arrest for attempted murder. Detective Morrison said, her voice crisp and professional. You have the right to remain silent. As the officer read Vivian her rights and placed her in handcuffs, Marcus moved to his mother's bedside. He took Eleanor's hand in his, relief washing over him so intensely that his knees nearly buckled. It's over, Mom, he whispered. You're safe now. She's never going to hurt you again. Vivian was silent. As they led her from the room, her face a mask of cold fury. But as she passed Marcus, she hissed one final threat. This isn't over. I have lawyers. I have money. I'll be out in days, and when I am, you'll be in prison. Detective Morrison interrupted. We've been investigating you for weeks. We have evidence linking you to 3 murders, 1 attempted murder. Multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. You're not getting out, Miss Walsh. Not ever. The use of her real name seemed to break something in Vivian. Her composure finally shattered, and she began screaming, struggling against the handcuffs, hurling threats and accusations. As the officers dragged her from the room, Marcus turned away, unable to watch. He focused instead on Eleanor, on the steady beep of her monitors, on the gentle rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. She was safe. And Vivian Ashford, Jennifer Walsh, was finally caught. As the police processed the scene, taking photos and collecting evidence, Marcus and Evelyn stood together beside Eleanor's bed. Reed arrived to coordinate with Detective Morrison, and the mansion slowly filled with police personnel and crime scene technicians. Through it all, Eleanor slept on, unaware that her life had just been saved, unaware of the battle that had been fought in her name. But Marcus knew, and Evelyn knew, and tomorrow when Eleanor woke, if she woke, they would tell her everything. They would tell her that she had been right all along, that her instincts about Vivian had been correct, that her son had finally listened, had finally acted, had finally protected her the way she had always protected him. The nightmare was over, or so they thought, because the story wasn't finished yet. There was one more chapter to write, one more miracle, waiting in the darkness, and it would begin not in days or weeks, but in hours. The silent witness was about to speak. The police had finally left, taking Vivian and all their evidence with them. Detective Morrison promised to keep Marcus updated on the investigation, and Reed had stationed 2 additional security guards at the mansion gates just in case Vivian had accomplices they didn't know about. The house was quiet now, too quiet after all the chaos. Marcus sat in the chair beside Eleanor's bed, still dressed in the scrubs that had been his disguise for the past 4 days. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. The adrenaline was still coursing through his system, his mind replaying every moment of the confrontation, every word Vivian had spoken. You should rest, Evelyn said softly. She had been organizing the room, putting everything back in order, After the police had processed it as a crime scene, "You've been awake for almost 20 hours. So have you. I'm used to long shifts. You're not." Evelyn came to stand beside him, looking down at Eleanor. "She's safe now. You can let go." "I don't know if I can." Marcus's voice cracked. "For 6 months, I've been terrified that she would die. And tonight she almost did. If we hadn't been here, if we hadn't figured it out." He couldn't finish the sentence. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "But we did. We saved her. And now she has time to heal. Time to come back to us." "What if she doesn't? What if she never wakes up? What if I never get to tell her how sorry I am for not listening to her, for bringing that monster into our lives?" "Marcus," Evelyn's voice was firm, "your mother knows you love her. She knows you fought for her. That's what matters." Marcus looked up at her, this woman who had stood by his mother through everything, who had risked her own life tonight to protect Eleanor. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done, for believing in her when I doubted, for being brave when I was blind." "You don't need to thank me," Evelyn said. "She's family. You're both family, and family protects each other." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the steady beep of Eleanor's monitors. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. A new day was coming. The wedding that would never happen was 36 hours away. Marcus thought about all the plans that would need to be cancelled, the guests who would need to be notified, the media storm that was coming once word got out about Vivian's arrest. His company's stock would take a hit. There would be questions, investigations, scrutiny. But none of it mattered, not really, because his mother was alive. "I'm going to stay with her," Marcus said, "for as long as it takes. I'm not leaving her again." "I'll stay too," Evelyn said. "We'll take shifts. You sleep for a few hours, then I'll rest. That way, she's never alone." Marcus nodded gratefully. He was about to ask Evelyn to take the first shift when something made him pause. A change in the room. Not in the sound, the monitors were steady. Not in the light, the dawn was still just beginning to break. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name. He looked at Eleanor's face and saw. Was that no? It couldn't be. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "look at her eyes." Evelyn moved closer, peering at Eleanor's face. Beneath her closed eyelids, Eleanor's eyes were moving, rapid darting movements. REM sleep, dreaming. "She hasn't done that in months," Evelyn whispered. "The doctor said it was unlikely she would ever." Eleanor's right hand twitched, just once but distinctly. Not the random muscle spasm they had seen before. This was different, purposeful. Marcus grabbed his mother's hand. Mom, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." Nothing. Marcus waited, his heart pounding. Then, so faintly, he almost thought he imagined it, he felt pressure. Eleanor's fingers squeezed his hand. "Oh my God," Marcus breathed. "She squeezed my hand. Evelyn, she squeezed my hand." Evelyn was already moving, checking Eleanor's vital signs with swift efficiency. Her brain activity is increasing. Heart rate is climbing slightly. "Marcus, I think she's waking up." What do? We wait. We stay calm. We let her come back at her own pace. Evelyn pressed the call button for the on-call neurologist, and we get Dr. Patel here immediately. The next hour was a blur of activity. Dr. Patel arrived within 20 minutes along with 2 nurses and a neurologist from UCLA Medical Center. They ran tests, checked reflexes, monitored Eleanor's brain activity with portable equipment they'd brought with them. Through it all, Eleanor's movements increased. Her eyes continued their rapid motion beneath her lids. Her fingers twitched more frequently. And once her lips moved, forming shapes that might have been words, though no sound emerged. "This is remarkable," Dr. Patel said, his usual professional calm cracking with excitement. "After 6 months, the statistical probability of meaningful recovery was less than 5%, but her brain activity is showing patterns consistent with emerging consciousness. She's fighting her way back." "Will she be okay?" Marcus asked. "Will she remember things? Will she be able to talk, to move?" "It's too early to know the extent of recovery. There may be cognitive impairments, motor difficulties, memory loss. But Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Patel smiled, "your mother is waking up. That alone is a miracle." Everything else we'll deal with as it comes. By mid-morning, Eleanor had progressed significantly. Her eyes were still closed, but her face was more animated. Her breathing had strengthened to the point where Dr. Patel felt comfortable reducing the ventilator support, and her hands moved frequently now, responding to touch and sound. Marcus hadn't left her side. He talked to her constantly, telling her about everything that had happened, about how they'd caught Vivian, about how she was right all along. He apologized over and over for not listening to her warnings, for bringing danger into their home. And with each word, Eleanor's responses grew stronger. It was Evelyn who suggested music. She remembered Eleanor mentioning once that she and Marcus's father used to dance to Sinatra in the library on Sunday evenings. So Evelyn found a playlist on her phone and played The Way You Look Tonight softly in the background. That's when it happened. Eleanor's eyes opened, not slowly, not gradually. One moment they were closed and the next they were open, staring at the ceiling with confusion and disorientation. Her breath quickened. Her hands gripped the sheets. "Mom!" Marcus leaned forward so she could see his face. "Mom, it's me. It's Marcus. You're safe. You're in your room at home. You've been in a coma, but you're waking up now. Everything is okay." Eleanor's eyes found his face. For a moment, there was no recognition, just confusion. But then something shifted. Her eyes focused. She knew him. Her lips moved. No sound came out at first. Her vocal cords were weak from months of disuse. But she was trying to speak. "Don't try to talk yet," Dr. Patel said, gently moving to the other side of the bed. "Your throat has been intubated for 6 months. It will take time to..." But Eleanor was determined. She swallowed, grimaced at the pain, and tried again. This time a sound emerged, rough and hoarse but intelligible. "Marcus!" Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. He didn't try to stop them. "I'm here, Mom. I'm right here." Eleanor's hand lifted slightly, reaching for him. He took it in both of his, holding tight. "We..." Eleanor's face contorted with effort. "We've... Iene..." "Gone," Marcus said firmly. "She's in jail, Mom. She can't hurt you. She can't hurt anyone ever again. We caught her." "We stopped her." Eleanor's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, tears were sliding down her temples. Relief, gratitude, and something else Marcus couldn't quite read. Over the next 2 hours, Dr. Patel and his team carefully removed the ventilator tube, a process that left Eleanor coughing and gasping, but breathing entirely on her own for the first time in 6 months. They gave her ice chips to soothe her throat, and slowly, her voice began to return. It was weak and raspy, but it was her voice. Eleanor Blackwood was back. "Tell me everything," Eleanor said. She was sitting up slightly now, propped on pillows, sipping water through a straw. Her speech was slow and labored, but her mind was sharp. Her eyes missed nothing. Marcus told her the whole story, about the cameras, about Vivian's manipulation, about his decision to go undercover as a nurse, about the evidence they'd collected, about the final confrontation just hours ago. Eleanor listened, without interrupting her expression, cycling through anger, fear, vindication, and finally pride. When Marcus finished, Eleanor looked at Evelyn, who was standing quietly by the window. "You," Eleanor said, her voice stronger now, "you knew from beginning." Evelyn stepped forward. "I suspected. I saw things that didn't add up, but I didn't have proof, and I didn't think Marcus would believe me against her. You Pento protected me." Eleanor reached out her hand and Evelyn took it. "You saved me." "We saved you," Evelyn corrected gently. "Marcus and I together." Eleanor looked between them, and despite her weakness, a small smile touched her lips. Good team." "Mom," Marcus said, "there's something else you need to know. About Vivian, about who she really is." He told her about the multiple identities, about the previous husbands who had died, about the life insurance payouts, about how Eleanor's car accident had been attempted murder, not mechanical failure. Eleanor's face darkened, but she didn't seem surprised. "Knew something evil. Couldn't prove, couldn't make you See, I see now, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you. I'm sorry I let her into our lives. I'm sorry I wasn't there when... Stop. Eleanor's hand tightened on his. You came back, fought for me, caught her. She paused, gathering strength. That's what matters. You chose right. Only because Evelyn helped me see the truth. Eleanor looked at Evelyn again, and this time her smile was wider. Told you, years ago, your family. Always. Family. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood. Eleanor, the older woman corrected. Call me Eleanor. No more, Mrs. Blackwood. As evening fell, Eleanor was transferred to a private suite at UCLA Medical Center for observation and intensive physical therapy. Her recovery was progressing faster than anyone had dared hope, but she still had a long road ahead. Months of rehabilitation to regain full motor function, speech therapy, occupational therapy. But she was alive. She was conscious. She was fighting. Detective Morrison came by the hospital to take Eleanor's statement. She listened as Eleanor described in halting words the argument she'd had with Vivian the week before the accident. How Vivian had threatened her, though the words had been subtle enough to deny later. How Eleanor had told Marcus she didn't trust Vivian. How a week later her brakes had failed. We'll add attempted murder to the charges from 6 months ago, Morrison said. Between that and everything from last night, plus the evidence we're gathering about her previous victims, Vivian Walsh is going to prison for the rest of her life. Good, Eleanor said simply. Her voice was stronger now, though still hoarse. Make sure she never hurts anyone. Again. I promise you, Morrison said. She's done. After Morrison left, Marcus sat with his mother in the quiet hospital room. The machines here were different from the ones at home, but they beeped with the same steady rhythm, the sound of life continuing. I'm going to cancel the wedding, Marcus said. Obviously, and I'll issue a statement to the press, something simple, due to unforeseen circumstances. No, Eleanor said. Marcus looked at her in surprise. No, don't hide. Eleanor's eyes were fierce despite her weakness. Tell the truth, tell them. What she was, what she did, warn others. The media will have a field day, the company's stock will recover, Eleanor interrupted. But if you hide, she wins. She becomes the victim. Poor Vivian framed by paranoid family. Eleanor shook her head. No, truth, always truth. Marcus nodded slowly. His mother was right, as always. Okay, I'll hold a press conference, tell them everything. Good. Eleanor smiled. And Marcus, yes, don't be alone anymore. Don't let fear make you isolate. Her eyes drifted to where Evelyn was talking with one of the nurses in the hallway. Good people exist. Trust the ones who prove themselves through actions. Marcus followed his mother's gaze. Evelyn was laughing at something the nurse said, and in the fluorescent hospital light, she looked tired but beautiful, strong, real. It's too soon, Marcus said quietly. After everything with Vivian. Not now, Eleanor agreed. But someday, when enough time has passed, when you're ready. She squeezed his hand. Don't let one monster make you forget there are angels too. The press conference had been brutal. Marcus told the complete story, held nothing back. The media exploded as expected. Vivian's face was plastered across every news outlet. Black Widow killer caught, screamed the headlines. Billionaire's mother wakes from coma to expose murderer. The story had everything: wealth betrayal, attempted murder, a dramatic rescue. It dominated the news cycle for days. But Marcus had been right to tell the truth. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Other women came forward with stories of interactions with Vivian, or Jennifer, or Catherine, or Amanda that had seemed off at the time. One woman had dated Vivian briefly and had noticed her obsessive research into wealthy targets. Another had been a neighbor of one of the dead husbands and had always suspected the accident wasn't accidental. The evidence piled up. The case against Vivian became ironclad. She was denied bail. The trial was scheduled for 6 months from now, but everyone knew the outcome was certain. Vivian Walsh would spend the rest of her life in prison. Eleanor continued her recovery at a specialized rehabilitation center in Santa Monica. She was walking now with assistance. Her speech had improved dramatically. The doctors were cautiously optimistic that she would make a near complete recovery. Marcus visited her every day, usually bringing work with him. He'd moved his office temporarily to a space near the rehab center so he could be close. Evelyn came too, though she had officially retired from her position as Eleanor's caregiver, now that Eleanor was in professional hands. But she couldn't stay away. None of them could. They had been through too much together. They were bonded now in a way that went beyond employer and employee, beyond family obligation. They were survivors, warriors, a team. Eleanor was discharged from the rehabilitation center on a sunny afternoon in late spring. She walked out on her own, using only a cane for balance. Her hair was styled again, her clothes elegant. She looked like herself, just a slightly frailer version. The mansion welcomed her home with flowers in every room and staff who cried when they saw her. Eleanor made her way slowly through the house, touching familiar objects, running her hands along the walls, breathing in the scent of home. When she reached her old bedroom, which had been completely redecorated, all medical equipment removed, she paused at the doorway. "I don't want to stay here," she said. "Too many bad memories. The room where she tried to..." "I already had another suite prepared," Marcus said. "The one overlooking the rose garden. Your favorite view." Eleanor smiled. "Perfect." That evening, they had a small dinner party. Just Eleanor, Marcus, Evelyn, Thomas Reed, Detective Morrison, and Tuts Patel. A celebration of life, of recovery, of justice served. "To second chances," Eleanor said, raising her glass of sparkling cider alcohol, "was still off limits per doctor's orders. To the people who fight for us when we can't fight for ourselves. To family in all its forms." "To family," they echoed. As the evening wore on, Marcus found himself on the terrace with Evelyn, looking out at the roses that bloomed eternal in his mother's garden. "She's doing well," Evelyn said. "Better than anyone expected. Thanks to you, you kept her alive long enough for her to heal." "We kept her alive," Evelyn corrected. "All of us. Together." Marcus turned to look at her. In the 6 weeks since Vivian's arrest, he'd had time to process everything that had happened. Time to understand how close he'd come to losing everything. Time to appreciate the people who had stood by him. And time to recognize feelings that had been growing slowly and quietly in the midst of all the chaos. "Evelyn," he began, then stopped. He'd rehearsed this conversation in his head a dozen times, but now that the moment was here, he didn't know what to say. "Too soon," Evelyn said, gently reading his mind. She smiled. "Way too soon, Marcus, for both of us. I know, I just wanted you to know that. Someday, when enough time has passed, when we're both sure it's not just trauma bonding or gratitude or..." "I know," Evelyn said. "I feel it too, but your mother is right. We need time. Time to heal. Time to be sure." "How much time?" Evelyn laughed. "I don't know. 6 months, a year. However long it takes for us to feel normal again. However long it takes for you to trust again." "I trust you," Marcus said. "I have never trusted anyone more." "Then trust me about this," Evelyn said. "We have time. We're not going anywhere. And when the moment is right, we'll both know." Marcus nodded. She was right. As usual. "Okay. We wait. We wait." Evelyn agreed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere inside the house, Eleanor's laughter rang out a sound that had been absent for too long, and was now the sweetest music in the world. The nightmare was over. The monster was caged. The family was whole again. And the future was waiting. Patient, possible, bright with promise. The courtroom was packed with media spectators and family members of Vivian's previous victims. The trial had taken 3 weeks, and now they were waiting for the verdict. Eleanor sat in the front row, flanked by Marcus and Evelyn. She had testified earlier in the week, describing the night Vivian tried to murder her with insulin. Her testimony had been calm, clear, and devastating. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case. Video footage, of Vivian confessing her plans, audio recordings of her conversation with the loan shark, financial records showing massive debts and life insurance payouts from previous marriages, testimony from forensic experts about the poison found in the exhumed bodies, and finally testimony from Marcus about his undercover investigation from Evelyn, about the missing insulin from Detective Morrison, about Vivian's multiple identities. The defense had tried to claim entrapment, but the judge shut that down quickly. Vivian had made her own choices. No one had forced her to enter Eleanor's room with a syringe full of insulin. Now, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury had reached a verdict. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder of Eleanor Blackwood, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder of Robert Price, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder of Thomas Bradley, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder of James Walsh, how do you find? Guilty. The verdicts continued. Guilty, guilty, guilty. On every count, on every charge. When it was over, Vivian sat perfectly still, her face blank, but her hands cuffed in her lap were trembling. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 3 consecutive life sentences to be exact. She would die in prison. There was no other outcome. As the bailiffs led Vivian away, she looked at Marcos one final time. There was no rage now, no threats, just cold, empty defeat. I almost had it all, she said quietly. I was so close. But you didn't, Eleanor called out from the gallery. Her voice was strong now, fully recovered. Because some things are worth fighting for, and some people can't be fooled forever. Vivian didn't respond. She simply turned away and let the bailiffs lead her through the door that would close behind her for the rest of her life. Outside the courthouse, Marcus held a brief press conference. He thanked Detective Morrison and the LAPD. He thanked Dr. Patel and the medical team. He thanked everyone who had supported his family through this nightmare. And he announced the creation of the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting victims of intimate partner violence and financial fraud. All proceeds from the lawsuit against Vivian's estate would go to the foundation. My mother survived, Marcus said into the cameras, but 3 men didn't. Their memories deserve to be honored. Their families deserve justice. And future victims deserve protection. That's what this foundation will do. It will make sure Vivian Walsh's legacy is not one of destruction, but one of hope. Eleanor stood beside him, leaning only slightly on her cane, her head held high. She didn't speak. Marcus had asked if she wanted to, and she declined, but her presence said everything. I survived. I fought. I won. The garden party at the Blackwood mansion was small and intimate. Just close friends, family, and the people who had stood by them through the darkest time of their lives. Eleanor moved through the crowd with ease now, her cane mostly decorative. She had made a remarkable recovery with only slight lingering effects from the coma. A bit of weakness in her left hand, occasional difficulty with complex words, but nothing that stopped her from living fully. The Eleanor Blackwood Foundation had raised over $10 million in its first year. They had helped dozens of women escape abusive relationships, funded investigations into other suspected Black Widow cases, provided support for families of fraud victims. Vivian's face had become synonymous with predatory manipulation. Her case was studied in law enforcement training programs. Articles were written about how to recognize the warning signs of financial predators in relationships. She had wanted to be remembered. She had gotten her wish, just not in the way she'd hoped. Marcos stood at the edge of the garden watching his mother laugh with Detective Morrison about something. Seeing her so alive, so vibrant, still felt like a miracle. There were days when he woke up and had to remind himself that it was real, that she had survived, that they had all survived. You look deep in thought, Evelyn said, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of champagne. Just grateful, Marcus said, accepting a glass. For all of this, for her, for... He paused. For you, Evelyn smiled. It's been a year. It has. Long enough. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had saved his mother's life, who had stood beside him through the investigation and the trial, who had proven through actions more than words that good people existed. That trust was possible. That love didn't have to be manipulation. I think so, he said. What about you? I've been sure for months, Evelyn admitted, but I was waiting for you to be ready. I'm ready. Marcus set down his champagne glass and took her hand. Evelyn Clark, would you like to have dinner with me, just the two of us? Not as employer and employee, not as colleagues or friends, but as something more. I would love to, Evelyn said, but on one condition. Name it. We'd tell your mother first. I don't want her to think we're sneaking around. Marcus laughed. She already knows. She's been not so subtly hinting about this for months. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Eleanor appeared beside them. Are you two finally going to admit what's been obvious to everyone else? Mom, it's about time, Eleanor said firmly. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you both in a room together. She looked at Evelyn. You're good for him, you make him better, and more importantly, you love him for who he is, not what he has. I do, Evelyn said simply. Good, Eleanor smiled. Then you have my blessing. Not that you needed it, but you have it anyway. She walked away, leaving Marcus and Evelyn standing together under the rose arbor, hands clasped, the future spreading out before them like an unwritten story. So, Marcus said, dinner this weekend, Evelyn agreed. But, Marcus, yes. Slow. We go slow. I don't care how long it takes. I'm not in a hurry. Neither am I, Marcus said. We have all the time in the world. And they did. Because they had survived, because they had fought for each other, because they had learned that the strongest foundations were built not in perfect circumstances, but in fire and fear, and the determination to protect what mattered most. The sun set over the Blackwood mansion, painting the roses in shades of gold and amber. Music drifted from the terrace, where guests were gathering for dinner. Laughter echoed through the garden. Eleanor stood at the center of it all, surrounded by the people she loved, grateful for every breath, every moment, every second chance she'd been given. She had been silent for 6 months, but she had been listening, learning, waiting, and when the moment came, when the truth needed to be told, she had spoken in the only way that mattered, through love, through loyalty, through the unwavering determination of those who refused to give up. The silent witness had testified, justice had been served, and life, messy, complicated, beautiful life, continued. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new stories. But today was for celebration, for gratitude, for the simple, profound miracle of survival. Eleanor Blackwood smiled and raised her glass. To truth, she said. To justice. To family. To family, they echoed. And in the fading light of a perfect California evening, surrounded by roses and laughter and love, Eleanor Blackwood looked around at the life she had fought so hard to keep and thought, this is worth everything.